in our walk. We're mature. You've been around people that are not mature. And when I say mature, I want to talk about the sense of, right now, Christian maturity. I've been around people that will nitpick you to death as far as a Christian. And every little thing you do, that's, oh, I can't believe you did that, or I can't believe you said that, or blah, blah, blah. They're not mature. When you're mature in your walk, you look past that. You look past those things because none of us are perfect. We try to strive to do the right thing. We try to strive to say the right thing, but we don't know each other's hearts. Only God knows our hearts. So what James is saying is that the perfect man or woman is a mature Christian. You ever been around somebody that they didn't say much, they would just listen, and you could tell that they are very wise. They didn't jump out, and you know how if you're in a meeting setting, you want to shine, you want to get your point across, you want to do that. But if you see the guy in there or the female in there that sits back and doesn't say a whole lot and listens, puts it all together, and then at the end, if asked, expresses their opinion, that is a mature Christian because they listen more than they talk. Another example would be a young male. I remember a fella that he was a young male, and he was very quick to run off at the mouth. And he encountered another gentleman that was much older, but also much wiser. And he run off at the mouth. Well, the older gentleman, instead of grabbing him and teaching him a lesson, which he could have, but he didn't, he sat the person down, talked to him, very soft-spoken, and by the time that they got to the end of the conversation, he was hugging them and thanking them, and he went on about his business. That is what I call a man, and the other is what I call a boy. Quick, wanting to jump off on something, and the man sits back. That's a mature Christian. That's what James is stating here at that maturity level. Because we are quick to want to say something, and we're quick to want to get our opinion out there. But sometimes it's better just to sit back and listen, and then, if asked, express our opinion. And some people do it out of personal gain, or they want to be seen. You've been in areas to where you see somebody that they do some odd stuff, but it's because they want to be seen. They want to be set aside from everyone else, do something a little different, and so I can be seen. I see that just on your everyday walk in the world. No matter where you're at, you see that. People trying to individualize themselves, and they want to be different. It says he's a perfect man also to bridle his whole body. When you can bridle your tongue, you're also directing your body in which direction to go. A simple illustration of that would be, I've been in meetings where most of the time that when I see this happen, it's a younger individual. But if things isn't going their way and they want to get their point across, they have this thing they call fight or flight syndrome. They get so mad on the inside, you'll see their head go to shaking, their hands go to shaking, their whole body gets affected because they're not getting their way. And so what's inside of that individual is what's creating that problem that he has around. What's in his heart is what's creating the problem. Verse 3, if we put bits into the mouths of horses so that that they obey us, we guide the whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. They are so large and are driven by strong winds. They are guided by a very small rudder wherever the wheel of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. You've been around folks that want to brag? Boy, they good at that, aren't they? They'll get to bragging and going, and they can do this and they can do that, and then when it comes time to doing it, they can't do it. But they good with that mouth. They good with that mouth. I can tell you, each time I got that way growing up, Daddy let me know, you need to be quiet. And usually he didn't say nothing. Usually he let me know about his physicalness is what he would tell me. I'd say, yes, sir, and move on. But that's what sometimes you got to have to get the point across. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. That tongue can start that fire and run that sucker for as far as it wants to go. Because once you start that fire with somebody, and then that person takes it and keeps running with it, and then that person takes it and keeps running with it, I'll use the analogy of gossiping about somebody. It doesn't take long for something to get around on somebody, whether it's true or not. And somebody's reputation can be ruined over just somebody speaking with their mouth. Doesn't even mean it's true. It seems like today's society, you got to prove yourself to be innocent first because you're automatically guilty when you're accused of something instead of the other way around. Your mouth has the power to direct the rest of your life. And as we said in verse 2, a perfect person is spiritually a mature person. And we all have stumbled in how we've lived our lives, and no one's perfect, and we know that. But when we know that we stumble, then we ask for forgiveness, and we learn from it, and we keep moving forward. If we don't learn from it, then we on the inside, me or anyone else, we have issues if we can't learn from it. The perfect person has bridled the tongue. And when I say perfect person again, it's talking about the mature Christian, has bridled the tongue. Therefore, he or she is able to bridle all the other stumbling blocks of life. Our Christianity is worthless if we can't control our tongue. Just in bringing people towards Christ, we have to watch what words we use and the speech we use. I've always said I've never been a big cusser. Even when I was a kid, I wasn't a big cusser. But I always thought, even in my teenage years, why can't we still get the same point across without using that kind of language? You can still get the same point across without using the language. To me, now don't get me wrong, when you go to the Midwest, that's how they talk. I mean, that's their language. But as long as you know that, you know they don't mean anything by it, that's their language. But us and how we grew up in our culture here in Georgia, we didn't use that language. But when you use that language, it meant there was a problem. I ain't talking about hitting your thumb with a hammer and you holler out a cuss word. I mean, I'm talking about when you every day use that language. It's a sign of insecurities and a sign of not being mature in the vocabulary, because we can still get our same point across without using that kind of language. We have to learn how to control our tongue. You have a 1,500-pound horse that can be steered by this little bitty piece of metal in its mouth. Doesn't take much. And we can actually take that 1,500-pound beast and you can move it to the left, you can move it to the right with that little piece of metal in its mouth. And And a horse that's not under control or not bridled, they all over the place. You can't do nothing with them. And that's how our tongue is when it's not bridled. It's going to go, because don't you know Satan is going to use that tool in the direction he wants it to go when we don't bridle it, which also brings us back to our relationship with Christ. If we've got a close relationship with him and we're sticking to him, then we don't give Satan the chance to get in there and use that tool for his good. It does happen at times. That's when we stumble. But for the most part, we should have control of it because of our relationship with Christ. If that that bit is not in that horse's mouth, he's going to buck you off. I remember during the summers, my mom would send me down to my Uncle Homer. And my Uncle Homer was what they called a hard-shell Baptist. Don't know if you know what that means. I didn't know what that meant when I was a kid. But he was a preacher, and he was a hard-shell Baptist. They would wash feet, and back then it was close to like a primitive Baptist. They didn't have power in the church, and they would sing songs without any instruments. And Tom Murphy at that time was the Speaker of the House. And my Uncle Homer and Tom Murphy was very good friends, and Tom Murphy would bring Uncle Homer to the Capitol to do the opening prayer. Well, everybody in the family knew, when you got around Uncle Homer, you was going to be straight up, because when you looked at him and he talked to you, you felt like he could see what was inside you. You felt like he could see what you was thinking. So I would make sure, man, don't have no bad thoughts when I'm around Uncle Homer. He's going to see that. And Uncle Homer didn't mess around. He was straight and to the point, and if you did something you wasn't supposed to do, he'd whip you right there on the spot. He didn't mess around. And so Mama would send me over there for the summers, and I'd spend the summer over there, and he'd have me up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he'd have me outside. And the first thing I had to do at daylight, now as soon as I woke up, my Aunt Catherine would have breakfast ready. And so I'd get over there at the table, and this is before daylight. I'm a teenager. I was up there at 5 o'clock in the morning eating breakfast. She'd have it ready. Orange juice here, the eggs, every sausage. I'd sit down, I'd eat. And then Uncle Homer would say, go out there. He would call me James. My name's Walter James Russell, but he would call me James. He said, James, go out there and pick all them apples up for my cows. Yes, sir. So I'd go out there and I'd pick a lot of apples up, and I'd fill them up in 5-gallon buckets. Then we'd have to carry them out to his cows, and I'd dump them out to the cows. Then we'd have to go to the garden and pick everything that was ready. Then we'd have to go to the mill village and where the mill was, where everybody worked, and we would peddle all that stuff off. He'd sell it $2 a bushel or whatever what he was selling. And then I may get $2 or $3 that day for carrying it to people's car. And so here's my point. I just told you that to say this. He had this mule, and I wanted to ride it. And he said, James, you can go ride it, but it ain't never had nothing on it before. And I said, Uncle Homer, I can ride that mule. And he'd love that kind of stuff. It didn't bother him. He said, well, then you go out there and you jump on it. And he stood out there, and he'd have these one pair of coveralls on, and they'd be blue. Long sleeve, be 90 degrees, long sleeve, and he had this big old white straw hat he wore. So he's standing out there, and he's leaning up on the fence like this. He sent me over there, and I went over there, and I forget the mule or the donkey's name. I forget what its name was. So I slipped in the barn there, and I thought I was going to ride it. Well, I learned real quick I wasn't going to ride it. I got on there, and I stayed on there maybe 2 seconds. And that thing bucked me off and sent me sailing out in through the pasture. And he's over there just laughing his head off. But the point is, it didn't have a bit, didn't have a bridle. It was wild, hadn't been tamed. And that's how our tongue is. It's if we don't tame it and hold on to it and keep our relationship close to Christ, that's what's going to happen. Our tongue's going to run off at the mouth. You can take an entire cruise ship that holds thousands, can be steered by this tiny rudder, and that cruise ship can hold upwards of 7,000 people. It's like a small city. You got swimming pools on there, ice skating rinks, movie theaters. It's a small city traveling, but yet one little small rudder can guide its course and keep it tamed and keep it the direction it should go. But James is telling us our tongue is even harder to tame than that cruise ship and that horse without a bit in its mouth as well. Your mouth has the power to damage your life. And we can even use it for good or we can use it for bad. And you take somebody you've been around that's always negative and always talking negative, usually their whole life is negative and everything they touch is negative, because you know as well as I do, we want to be around people that are excited, that are uplifting, that's also a good influence. And when you're around those kind of people, you want to stay around them. But when you get around the other individual that goes the other direction, that can't tame his tongue, that's going to say whatever comes out of it, and also is negative all the time, then he's pretty much guiding his life in the direction that he's going. He don't realize it, or she doesn't realize it, but that's what's happening. If you look in verse 5, the damage done by the tongue is devastating. One single word can be like a spark that starts a fire. So if you look at verse 5, it says, "So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things, and how great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness." Back in 1871, Miss O'Leary's cow caused the entire city of Chicago to burn. And on October the 8th, 1871, a cow belonging to Miss O'Leary kicked a lantern in the barn, set some hay on fire, and within minutes, the entire barn was ablaze. And due to those Chicago winds, the flames ended up spreading throughout Chicago, burning a large percentage of the city, leaving 100,000 people homeless, 7,500 buildings destroyed, and the deaths of 300 people. Of course, the correlation here is the enormous damage that our tongue can do when we start that fire. And we all have seen it with gossip and whatever else you want to throw in the mix, but we have seen it. I remember a time that at one time my dad used to own a body shop here in Newnan, and he sold and retired. Well, that's what I thought I was going to do. When I graduated high school, I said, I'll just go work with Dad and learn, that business. And well, he told me no. And he said, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to go do something different. I don't want you in this business, breathing the Bondo dust and the paint and all that. And, well, we had a big old argument. And we had some words. And those words sent me leaving home. I said, well, okay, well, I'm hitting the road then. If you don't want to do that, then I ain't got nothing for you. I hit the road. I mean, we didn't mind telling each other what we thought. And but we have a strong bond today because we didn't mind telling each other what we thought. And so I told him that, and after about 2 weeks, he called me and said, all right, come on back and I'll let you work up here and we'll see how you like it. I worked there probably 2 weeks and I said, you're right, it ain't what I want to do. But my point is, all those words and arguments we had was words that created problems that I used and he already had the wisdom, he already knew. But I'm young, and I think I know everything, and I don't, but I think I do. And so I spouted off many of words that I shouldn't have spouted off, and it created a problem. And it's going to happen. We think we get better, which we do. I shouldn't say that. We do get better. But there'll be a time that you think everything's going good, and all of a sudden somebody will say one little old word that'll set you off, and the next thing you know, all that stuff that you thought that you had under control has done, whew, it's gone just like that. And that's what we got to be careful of. It's going to happen again in our lives. We're going to say some things we shouldn't say. But as long as we're conscious of what we're trying to do and what James is telling us, then it shouldn't happen as much. I guess would be my point on that. And think of James now, just for a second. We hadn't looked at it from his perspective, but just as far as his personal life, he's writing it down biblically in the Bible for us. But think of Jesus was his half brother. Now you think about it. He knows everything, and he's also wise, and he probably also kept his mouth shut and would listen and only interject when needed. You don't think James got jealous of that when they were growing up? You don't think James said some things he shouldn't say? So I believe that James is speaking from experience of his own life, because he grew up with Jesus. If you grew up with him, man, don't you know you always going to be wrong, because he's always right. So James is definitely speaking from experience when he's telling us about the tongue. And there's no telling how many times he probably stumbled over his own words, especially growing up with Christ. Did we read verse 6? Yes, we did. So the tongue's more difficult to tame than taming wild animals. Now, that's what James says in verses 7 and 8. And if you look in verses 7 and 8, it says, "For every kind of beast and bird, of a reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison." Let's take the animals just for a second as an illustration. And you go to the circus. Now, who would have thought that man could take a lion and have him sit? Or a man could take a lion and put his head in its mouth and not have to worry about it chomping it off. Or taking a tiger and he's jumping through rings or loops or rings of fire or whatever. Now, don't get me wrong, there's times that once you get that comfortable with those animals, they will strike every so often. But for the most part, man did tame them to do certain things, and he did get that accomplished. And what James is saying is, our tongue is harder to tame than those beasts that man has tamed. That's, to me, is pretty enforcement language there about the tongue. You take, and by the way, the animals that couldn't be tamed, they went to the zoo. But the tongue is a powerful weapon, and we must note and know that it's a powerful weapon. Number 3, your mouth has the power to determine life. Your tongue can either lead you into a hellacious problem, or throughout your life and others' lives, or can choose to be a mature and wise and encourage others along the way, which will lead us to a less complicated life. But it's up to us to choose the direction we're going to go, especially when we get in that situation where we want to let somebody have it and we're in the right, and we still want to let somebody have it. Then when you can control that tongue, then you got a little bit of a hold on it. But there's still going to be a time that it's going to slip every so often. And I'm just not talking about the words that you use, but the portions of the words, but the meaning behind the words that you use and how you use them to people, how we can tear them down so easily. You don't necessarily have to use vile language to tear somebody down. You can do it with different vocabulary altogether. Sometimes your mom could look at you, and just the way she looked at you, you knew to sit down and be quiet. And so that's how our words are. Our words are the same way. And that's when we're controlling our body as well, when we control our tongue. Now, that's what James said through chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. And then you ask yourself, well, what can we do? You know, what can we do to tame the tongue? He's told us all the things that's going to happen, and he's told us how hard it is to tame the tongue. But what's the how-tos to tame the tongue? Well, I'm glad you asked, because he actually tells us the how-tos, and it's all in James. And I'm not going to read every verse because we'll be here all night, but I'm going to read a few of them to let you know what James says is what the how-tos are on how to tame the tongue. Chapter 1 and verse 5, and all these chapters and verses I'm going to name out is in James. We're not in any other book other than James. But chapter 1, verse 5, it says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given to you. So one way is we ask God for wisdom. We ask him, and we pray to him, and we keep a close relationship. Everything we do, the key is going to be having a close relationship with Christ. Anything we do in life, whether it be taming the tongue or whatever it may be that you can think of, the key is having a close relationship to Christ. Chapter 1, verses 9 through 10. Let the brother of low degree rejoice in that he is exalted, but the rich in that he is made low, because as the flower of the grass he shall pass away. Chapter 1, verse 13. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. God doesn't tempt us. The devil tempts us, and our own desires and sinful nature tempts us. But God doesn't tempt us. So when we want to say something we shouldn't say, it's not of God. It's either our own desires or our lust, or it's Satan himself, or it's our sinful flesh. You know, sometimes I hear people say, well, the devil, you know, he just got in there and I can't believe. No, you did that. You can't blame everything on the devil. You can't blame everything on Satan. Sometimes you got to take responsibility for your own actions. And yeah, we're all sinners. And yes, we all have sin in us, but we also know what's right and wrong. And we also know when we're doing something wrong, we know we're doing something wrong. There ain't a time I ever did anything wrong that I had to say, well, I don't know, was that? I ain't quite sure. Not unless you're trying to justify it so that you can still do it and it be okay. We all know when we do wrong, we know we're doing it when we're doing it. So here's a good one that James says in chapter 1, verse 19. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. And I think that's the best one out of all the ones that I've seen thus far, is that we're slow to speak. Someone told me, and I can't remember where I heard it from, but I've used it ever since I've heard it. And if I get frustrated on the inside, what I try to do is take a big breath before I actually say anything. If not, what may come out of my mouth may not be good when I get frustrated. So I try to take a big breath and think about it for just a moment and then speak on it. If not, you may create a mistake with the words that you use. But slow to speak and swift to hear. You know, here's one thing, the way you can look at it. We got 2 ears and we only have 1 mouth. So, I mean, you would think we listen more than we talk. Have you ever been around that person that all they want to do is talk, and no matter what, you can't even get a word in? They just and he's, goodness gracious, why'd you even ask me if you don't even let me answer the question? I know a guy that he'll call and ask me Bible questions, and before I can even try to answer them, he's on to another question and on to another question, you know. So then I just end up and I just sit there and listen, and then when he gets done, I say, okay, well, let me know if you need anything else. Okay, thank you, Rusty. I ain't answered the first thing. chapter 2, 1 through 4, my brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, must not show favoritism. You ever been in a situation where you may think highly of this individual, but you wouldn't do the same thing for this individual? You would help this individual because of maybe what you would get out of it, but you're not going to get anything out of helping this one, so you just don't mess with that one. Are we supposed to be that way? No, we're supposed to treat everybody the same. But do we always do that? No. And this doesn't even have anything to do with what we're talking about it, but it made me think of it. I was in LaGrange this week, and when I got through eating, I was walking to the truck. I got in the truck. I looked up, and here comes a lady coming to the vehicle. You all know when you see that coming, you know what's coming. You know what's coming next. Somebody's going to be asking for some money or whatever, but they're going to be wanting something. So I roll the window down. I'm already thinking in my mind, here we go. That's what I'm thinking. So I roll the window down, and she said, hey, and she goes into this big story. I don't even hear the story because when she starts off, it doesn't even make sense. So I done tuned her out already, but I sit there and act like I'm listening to what she's saying. And when she gets through all of that, she says, I just want to know, can I borrow $5? I was going to get something to eat over here at the Mexican restaurant. And I look up, and there's a Mexican restaurant right here, but she's pointing that way. And I said, well, instead of going that way, I said, there's a Mexican restaurant right there. I said, that's much closer. She said, oh, yeah, it is. I said, well, how about this? How about we go over there together, and I'll get you something to eat. She said, does that mean you're not going to give me the cash? I said, yeah, that's exactly what it means. She said, okay, thank you. Walks off. But, does that have anything to do with what we were just talking about? No, but it made me think of it when I said we should treat everybody the same. I wasn't rude to her. I was nice. It happens to me all the time, people coming up and asking for stuff, and I always will say, if they're asking for that particular item, I'm not rude to them. I will say, well, I'll go help you get it. Like, one person asked that they were out of gas and they needed gas money. And I said, well, where's the gas can at? And they said, well, I got to get one of them too. I said, well, how about let's go to AutoZone. I said, get in the truck. We'll go to AutoZone. I'll get you a gas can and we'll go get some gas and I'll help you put it in the car. He said, well, I don't want to bother you with all that. Just give me the money and I'll go take care of it. I said, no, I'd rather just go help you. He said, well, just give me the money. I said, well, let me put it this way. If I can't come help you, you don't get no money. He said, okay, thank you, and walks off. So, that's a good way of knowing that that's not really what they want. You call them out on it and you go to help them. Now, I will say one person came up and they asked for a meal and they took me up on it and we went in and ate together. And that was a good feeling for me because it was actually true of what they were asking for. But most people, they lying to you. They ain't telling you the truth. And in chapter 2 of James, it also says, suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing the fine clothes and say, here's a good seat for you, but say to the poor man, you stand there and sit on the floor by my feet, have you not discriminated amongst yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? And I'm guilty of it. I've been in situations where I would look down upon a person versus another person. I'm not going to lie about that, and I think everybody has, and whether they say they have or they haven't. But what the Bible tries to tell us is we treat everybody the same no matter what. Doesn't mean you got to bend over backwards for everybody. It just means that if they do need help and you can help them, then you help them, whether they rich or poor, ugly, pretty, it doesn't matter. You try to help, you don't discriminate. And if you find out they're being untruthful with you, then you move on. No guilt. You do the best you can, you move on. Chapter 2 and verse 12 says, speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom. Chapter 2 verse 16 says, if one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, then what good is it to speak those words? You ever heard somebody say, well, you call me if you need anything, I'll help you do whatever. And then when you do need something, you call them, they ain't nowhere around. So why even say it if you're not going to do it? What I typically try to do is when I tell somebody something is I'll say, if they're a close friend and I like them, I'll say, when you get me, you got me for life. And that's what I'll tell them, unless you do something crazy. And whatever that may be, I don't know. But my point is if they call and they needed something, I'd be there to help them no matter what. But I have had many people tell me the same thing, and then when I did need something, I'm by myself. I don't see them anymore. But what James is saying is if you say it, mean it. If you don't mean it, then just don't say it. What time are we supposed to stop? I don't know. I don't know if I got enough to go tonight. So verse, let's see. I have like 20 points that James has in here on backing up the how-tos, but I'm not going to read all 20 of them. But I'm just trying to pick out the ones that are very good that we would relate to very easily. All the ones that I've read that you didn't catch on to, if you go back and look at it, you'll find out exactly what it's saying. And I know that most of the time when people say, well, go back and look at it, you probably won't ever go back and look at it. But that is what James is some of those that I didn't dive into. It's all pointing towards taming the tongue and how to do it. Chapter 3, verse 14, but if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. We've all been there. Want something that somebody else has got or jealous of someone else. Man, I've been there many a times. And God teaches me every time that I get in that situation. And what I've come to find out in my own life is just like Paul said, be content. And if you're content, then you got peace, and you throughout your whole life. It doesn't matter. Don't compare yourself to somebody else. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And you don't know what that individual did to get where they got. Some of them could have cheated their way to doing what they did as far as materialistic things, and some of them worked very hard to get where they're at. But it ain't us to judge that, and it ain't us to compare to it. And when we do that, and we get that selfish and that rotten poison inside of us to where we're doing things we shouldn't do because we want the same things, then it's hard to be an effective Christian and a mature Christian at that. And on top of that, the words that you'll start using, because that selfishness is in your heart. And until you get rid of it, it's hard to control your words as well. That's what James is saying. Keep it out. Keep it out. And and we can go back and say, look at James, because James grew up with Christ. You don't think he had some of that in his heart growing up with Christ? I guarantee he had. Guarantee you he did. Chapter 4, verse 1, James says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? And they do. We have battles every day on the inside, and we constantly battle with our sinful nature, let's just use sinful nature, because there's no sense in even putting lust and all these other things in there, because it's our sinful nature is the umbrella for all of it. And then Satan also come in there, and if he sees a little crack, man, he's in there, and he'll start using that and work it against you. And before you realize it, you're already going down the wrong path. It's kind of like getting around a group of guys or females, doesn't matter, friends, let's say that, a group of friends, or people you just met, and you start hanging out with them and doing things, and a year into it, you realize, man, I would have never done this a year ago, but you didn't realize it because it was progressing very slowly, and you was being influenced. All right, I'm gonna do one more, and then we'll quit because it's 7:30, and I know we're supposed to be done by then. I think. Let me pick a good one. Okay, we're gonna do two more. Chapter 5, verse 13, James says, "Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs and praise." And when we in that happy moment, we ought to be thanking God. We thank Him because everything that we got, everything that we do, everything He controls. And we may not like some of the things that happen in our lives, but we do know that He's in control no matter what. We're not going to be able to answer all the questions that people are going to ask you about, well, if He's in control, how come He let this happen? Or how come He let that? We're not going to be able to answer all those questions. Nobody can. But here's what we do know. We serve a God that's alive, that rose from the grave, and there's only one that did it, and that's the one we serve. And as long as we keep our relationship close to Him, and we also point others towards Him through our life's journey, then we can't go wrong. All the other stuff can fall to the wayside. In chapter 5, verse 19, "My brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth, and someone should bring that person back." And let's hope that if we're a mature Christian and we see somebody heading off, that we somehow, some way, care enough for them to interject things, not beat them over the head and tell them they're doing wrong, but out of love, try to bring them back towards Christ as time goes on. Some people are easy to bring back. Some are not so easy because they're stubborn. But if you're a true friend and you're mature, then you'll find a way to ease and interject things along. It may take a year, it may take 6 months, maybe 5 years, who knows? But I know an individual right now, 10 years later, and he's back. It took a while, but he came back. And so you don't give up. And as long as you keep your heart right and keep your words right and you mature and you listen more than you talk, then you'll have that wisdom, and people will see that in you. And they'll listen to you when you speak, because we all know we're tired of seeing, or I shouldn't say we're tired of seeing, we're tired of hearing words. We want to see the action behind those words. And so when you're mature, you'll be walking the way you're talking, and vice versa as well. And then people see that. It may take longer for others than it does for the other people as well, but in the long run, they all end up seeing it. And when they know the true you, then it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It shouldn't matter what anybody else thinks anyway. That's the truth of it. It shouldn't matter what anybody else thinks either way. You got peace, you got Christ in your heart, you do the best you can, and that's all you can do. Transform your way in which you speak. And I guarantee you it's going to transform in the direction that you go as well. But I believe everyone in here, as far as I've been around you a lot, and y'all are already there anyway. Half the time you don't say anything. When I'm talking, y'all are just listening. But it's because of your wisdom. I don't want to say this in a bad way, but I hope you know where I'm coming from when I say this. Most of all of you are older than I am, and I learn from you. And I like being around older people because all my life that's what I've done, and I learn from you. And because of your wisdom and what you know, I take and I listen. Whether you believe I'm listening to you or not, I'm listening, and I learn from you, and I apply it in my own life. And the greatest thing about that is that you don't mess around. You don't, you tell it like it is. And one day I'm going to be able to be there where I can just tell it like it is. You get to a certain age, you just tell it like it is because you don't care no more. And I still have to watch every little thing I say and do. But they just look past y'all. You know, you say something, they say, "Oh, don't worry about him, he's all right." But if I said that, they say, "You know, that scoundrel Rusty, you hear what he said?" But there again, my point is thank you for giving me the opportunity to come up here and speak. And I don't know if you got anything out of this or not, but I did when I was going through it. And there's so much more in there, and I wished I had time to have studied it even deeper, because there's a lot more in there than we just touched the surface of it about our tongues. But we all know what it can do and what damage it can do, but we also know what good it can do as well. So anyway, I'll end us in prayer and then we can be dismissed. Thank you, Lord, for your many blessings and everything you do for us. I pray that we watch our tongues and we try to contain them the best to our ability, but we also lean on you to help us do that as well. I pray that we edify each other and we encourage each other when we have the chance. And all these things I ask in your name. Amen.